Any questions, comments, or concerns?
Uh, just ask questions and I will answer them.
Okay, sounds fair enough. Welcome to another episode of Fair Folk at Work. It's not often I can say this, but my guest today needs no introduction. I'll
Uh,
just say his name and you'll know who he is. My guest today is David Springhorn. David, welcome.
Thank you very much for condescending to have me.
The condescension, I think, can go both ways.
You are the funniest man I have ever met.
And you are the one who can communicate and control almost any audience with the words that just spontaneously fall out of your mouth. And when you watch this guy on stage in front of an audience of 2,000, you know they are just captivated, going just exactly where David wants them to go. And I've seen it happen so many times. I'm in awe. At any rate, so let me just start with the traditional first Fair Folk at Work question, which is, who is the person who said to you, there's this thing called fair, and what did they say to get you out there?
I was at a theatrical camp, going from junior high school to high school. And one of the shows, which was a Moliere piece, was doing a show called The Mischievous Machinations of Scapin, which is actually pretty good. So they did it out at the fair, and I and an acquaintance went and saw it. And this was at Peacock Gap, which was in Northern California. And it was the most beautiful fair I had ever seen or have seen. Northern Fair is very beautiful, the one out at Black Point, but it didn't hold a candle to Peacock Gap. And that was my introduction. And so I was doing a commedia show, and I decided to see if I could do a show at the Renaissance Fair. By then, they'd moved over to Black Point. So I did my commedia show. It's maybe actually 75, pretty sure, because 76 is when I was drafted into the court. And that was the beginning of the fair becoming my ethnic background for many, 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 many years. And I had every intention of staying there for the rest of my life.
Can I get back to Peacock Gap?
Sure.
What memories of sensations do you still have from that fair the first time you walked in?
I got to see Billy Scudder do commedia on the stage. And I have never been so impressed by a company in my life. Judy Corey and a guy named Carl Arena, who is a Capitano, and Mark Hughes Ziebenthal and a guy named Kenny Milliken. And they were amazing. And I also remember the smell. There was a lot of patchouli oil in those days, which I've grown to loathe. But at the time, it was very exotic. And I remember it had a lot of levels, like Agura does. But they were all much, much more bushy, woody. And it seemed like around every corner there was something amazing. The music also.
Yeah.
In the olden days, there was a lot more music. It seemed like there was a recorder band on every corner. And ethnic music, I remember flamenco music and belly dancing music. That's how I remember when the fair was really the fair, is before they got rid of all the ethnic music for whatever reason.
You mentioned commedia. What commedia role did you play?
I have played Brigella, who used to be, they called him the first Zani, and he was the Bud Abbott to Arlecchino's Lou Costello. But mostly I played Capitano, but mostly I played Dottore, who is the wisecracking, dim-witted doctor. I remember doing a show once with Margit, and all of those guys. And it was a gas. I went out of my way to do Commedia whenever possible.
What for you was the attraction of the Commedia?
Low humor, which is my specialty, room for improvisation, and it's so much fun to speak with an Italian accent. And the people who did Commedia in general were usually the looniest and cleverest.
In talking to other Commedia people, and they say for them, one of the attractions of Commedia is that you have a mask and you have a definite stylized costume that you can just inhabit and become somebody else. Do you find
Yes,
that to be
yes.
true?
You knew who you were, definitely. One of my favorite years is I forgot I got to Pantalone. And it was one of those brief moments when I was very thin, and I have rarely had as much fun. But if you put on the Pantalone mask, that was the spirit of the miserly old man who was Venice. Puccinella, who was stupid, was from Napoli. Every region had its mask, but it was also a stereotype character that you could make your own. You know, you had the parameters, but you definitely could take liberties with it. That was another thing I loved. The character became your character.
I'm sort of jumping all around. One of the things I also think about the fair is that it was very much from the ground up kind of organization. The fair kind of gave you the outline of it's the Queen's coming, it's fair day, go out and have fun, but no one sat over your head and sort of programmed down what you were doing. The fair was kind of like that for me.
They were very supportive in the early days when there were a lot of would-be Hollywood actors and actresses showing up there. There was a lot of freedom, especially doing stuff in the streets. As long as you weren't holding up a main artery, you could do just about anything you wanted to. It is always wise to build a character, do some research, and work within that. I always used to get a hat, and that would be the thing that started it. And I build the character and persona from there.
Towards the later years that I knew you at the fair, it seemed you had your fair persona pretty much in place. Was
That was my job.
was that always your job, or did you have an earlier persona that you tried out and discarded it in favor of the one that you later came to have?
I started in St. Cuthbert's Guild before it was St. Cuthbert's Guild, and I was in parades, and they gave us little jobs to do. And one of them was to greet the Queen as a bunch of country middle class people. And I got in with a guy named Patrick Duffy, who was heavily researched. So we were the Queen's court. They had somebody doing all of that before, but I do believe his name was Dundee. He was an amazing costumer and a magnificent performer. Also, you know, he was professional, so we were cheaper. So they had us do the court for several years. And it was more off the stage and into the court glade. And we did a lot of historical improvisation. And I played characters like Francis Walsingham, who was the head of the Secret Service. And then I played Christopher Hatton, who was one of the pretty boys, where I wore a corset, which I do not recommend. But those costumes are like wearing a dead refrigerator. I looked pretty, so I didn't care. And they were nice people, but it got so boring that it was time to move on, and got together with Theo Katzoff and Wendy Katzoff, and we invented this thing, the Keystone Cops, Halberdiers, which was town militia just back from Ireland. And it was supposedly the guys were supposed to be a fence between the audience and us so we could do fencing shows. because Theo was a professional. He was an incredible stage and movie theatrical fencing choreographer. And we turned from an exhibition group into a joke. Basically, we were everywhere doing everything, and the fair loved us for a while. They used to send the people that couldn't make it anywhere, especially the first year, the people that just didn't get it. We got a guy named Michael Cavalti, who is in his way a genius. And he was a troublemaker along with his friend Lindsay. But we built this wonderful little haven of weirdos, a lovely little family for quite a while, till I got called upstairs to do the sheriff. And the thing that was really funny was I missed it. I should have taken the halberdiers along as the constables. Didn't think of that till years later. So I started doing main characters and shows from that moment on. And I was less in the street.
Can I ask another question?
Sure.
You mentioned, and this is going to before the fair, that you were in a junior high school theatrical troupe. Talk to me about your pre-fair theatrical experience.
The only thing I ever was good at is doing theater. The rest of school was a wash. So I was always doing theater. But when I found the Renaissance Fair, I didn't want to do anything else. As a matter of fact, I opened a crafts booth at one point because I couldn't afford to live on what they were giving me. So I was giving them in percentages far more than they were paying me.
What about the outdoor aspect of the fair appealed to you more than doing a show in a building?
I don't like learning lines, was really the selling point. I like improv, and it became pretty much the definition of my life. I always knew what to do there and what was needed, and I did it. And for many, many years, people were very happy, and I was happy. Met my wife there. My kid was almost born in Agura until the kid came along. Didn't really want to do anything else. And I had to go and get a job up at Universal Studios. I was very lucky and had a great job for about 16 years. Played W.C. Fields, did show intros, and made a lot of money traveling for Universal Studios. But I did that for money. And I was always waiting for the weekends for whatever show I was doing.
Now, the impression I got at the time, shows at Universal were very organized, hit your mark, say your lines. And when I think
Well,
of you at the fair, that is not what I envision.
at one point, I did nothing but shows. Did the Queen show and the Noon show, and then we did the Elixir show. I spent very little time in the streets after that. So I guess I got away from improv theater and into standard, but that's what was needed. So I did it. I think after a while, total improv in the streets gets a little old.
I'm going to ask a question that is again a little bit on the touchy-feely side. So if
Go
you,
ahead.
when you're on the street talking to a family or an individual and you make a connection, that's one type of psychic reward that you can have as a performer. When you're on stage and you're getting 600 people to laugh at something, that's a different type of psychic reward. First of all,
No. As a
okay,
matter of fact, it isn't.
well, tell me how
The
I'm wrong.
Well, let me tell you, because whatever I did, my strengths were connection with the audience. You know, when I'm working for one person, they get 100% of me. And I found out a rare trick that can be done, which is how to make 700 people think that they're having a personal relationship with you. And also how to join them into one being, which is why I am so addicted to audiences, It's that roar that really does it. That's the crack right there.
What can you say is that trick of making 600 people feel like they're just one person talking to you?
I don't know. It's just something I can do when I'm not rusty, basically. I guess you'd call it charisma. That's what I had to sell. I can communicate with large amounts of people. I talk to them individually and as a single being. But I never really had a gigantic personality till I went out to the fair and could broadcast it. That was my specialty. That's why they put up with me for so long.
I am going to
And
share with you a story of you performing and I observing. And this was not at the fair. Do you remember when we sort of took over the Moose Lodge in Glendale?
yes,
It wasn't necessarily a vaudeville show, but it was just another one of fair people having a show in another venue kind of thing. And you were the MC, and it was the start of the show, and you were doing the "Are we having fun yet? Yay! Are we having fun yet? I can't hear you. Yay!" That kind of thing. And I was in the back, and there was a kid in the like row right in front of you, and I think he was developmentally disabled, and he was just getting so into yelling. He was about to sort of take over what was going on. And I saw you, and I can't explain it other than sort of mentally shift gears. You took your focus to the kid who was about to be disruptive quite innocently, and he was just so happy to be being revved up. And you just talked to him and you got him to calm down. Also, at the same time, talk to his caregiver. You could tell she was getting nervous and you calmed her down. At the same time, you kept the rest of us engaged in what was going on. And we were calm, knowing that we weren't going to have a problem. And you did it in like 30 seconds of just calming everybody down, but still keeping the energy up. And then the little boy just calmed down. And then you went back, went on with the show. And it was the most masterful way of being aware of your audience, being in the moment to sort of direct the audience the way you wanted to go. And then just once the thing was dealt with, you were able to proceed. Anyway, I just have to say that it was one of the many times I've seen you. You were both in your head as the MC or the sheriff or whatever, but you were listening to the audience and sort of sensing where they were. And maybe that's how you get them to be at one with you, is that you were taking in what they were doing and then giving it back to them, your sort of impression of what they were doing. So I'll stop talking.
well, all you need to do is, and it is rather simple, is believe in yourself. And I did. In the real world, I did not. But the thing that was interesting was I knew what I was doing. I've been doing it for, 30 years. And it was all I wanted to do, really. So I don't know if I can do that anymore. It'd be interesting to find out, but not that interesting. But in the day, I'd have like horrible stage fright. And then the minute I'm in front of the audience and it's just them and me, I would say 9 out of 10 times my human mind would be superseded by the muse. I was just so in love with the audience and wanted to please them. I knew what I was doing and did it, and did it a lot for many, 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 many years. The whole audience needs to be happy. They're happier when things have many levels of communication. But I have always thought that the wonderful thing about live theater is entirely comedy. Is you can take a group of humans that will probably never see each other again and turn them into one being and unite them with this phenomenon of laughter. And for a moment, they are suspended in the universe, and they got no problems. They got no past, no future. They're just at liberty to express themselves and be happy. They almost become like a god. And I was glad to be able to orchestrate that when I could. And as I said, I'd say I could do it 9 out of 10 times, but sometimes that 10th time would be embarrassing. There was failure and more later on. As time went on, I pulled in my scope when I do a fair to the point where I had a booth at Southern Fair, which was entirely given over to occult and fantasy items. It was called the Ort Fairy. We just gave up doing it because we're all too old. And it was like the old fair. It was just me and the audience. And I sold them wands and magical things that I believed in. And so they walked out a little better than they walked in.
What I'd like
Yes.
to do now is give you the names of some of the other actors out at fair who I thought had a similar ability to impact the audience. And what do you think was the source of their appeal? First one I'd like to say was Louisa Puig.
Oh my God. The woman was like a lancet. She was a tiny little thing, but when she was done up as the queen, she could put them in the palm of her hand. She had great strength and bearing, and it was a delight working with her. And she'd also improv in the street, and she was a kick because she didn't have to improv in the street. She just improv. She had to get to wherever it is. She had to get her makeup on, etc. And she'd do genius from one place to another. She had strength, great strength, very educated, incredibly educated. They stuck pretty much to a regular regimen, but she made it look very real. That's one of her, it was like she was spectacular. And everybody sat there being impressed by her. They believed she was the queen. There's only been 2 queens that I have experienced that really had that kind of power. And the other one was Athene Mahalakas, who was actually my gift to the fair because I talked her into trying out. She did a lovely job. She looked like the queen. She was strong like the queen. It was a delight to work with her for the years she was there.
What did she do before she was the queen? How did you interact with her theatrically?
She was in the court. She did dance shows. It's funny. It's like watching a racehorse plow a field. Because once she became the queen, she was different than Louisa, but she had the same strength and charisma. You can dress anybody up as the queen. We were very lucky because we had an incredible costumer. I don't remember which one. But if you don't have talent, you can't pull it off. But both of them were incredible.
Here's another name, Kevin Brown.
Kevin Brown, the thing about Kevin Brown was he was the funniest man I'd ever met, but he couldn't write comedy to sell his soul, which was hilarious. He was a wonderful head of entertainment. He was a genius. Except he had an absolute genius for killing every joke I'd created from the year before and expected me to create brand new ones, which I didn't know at the time was a challenge worth having. Whatever he did, he was funny. It was so researched. Of course, we have to take into consideration that the theatrical part of the fair is only half of it. The after hours half, Kevin was even funnier. When he was head of entertainment, we would party at his trailer and laugh all night long, get up, work, laugh all day long. And he was educated. The man was incredibly educated. He was like the male Louisa Puig, but no one is like Louisa Puig, really.
Okay. Tell me about Mark Lewis.
Oh my God, he was like a brother. He got a little cute, and in that, he lost me. So his stories were not that important to me, and I'd seen his show, and that was enough. But the time I spent with him was precious. Just as a human being, there's a quality at the fair that is, I call magic. And that's one of the reasons I was so good at what I did, is I can perceive magic in the air and manipulate it. And he was real good at that. And the whole point is, it's almost like you use the audience as a magic wand. You enlighten them and empower them, and they're there for you, giving and taking energy to a point where the environment is completely changed. He could do that with his stories, but mostly he was a dear friend of mine. And after all that cuteness, he could tell a dirty joke that would leave you in a laughing pile on the floor, and he would mea culpa all over the place. But that guy was a funny, strong, incredibly talented man.
What I got from looking at Mark Lewis and basically everybody I'm going to be talking about is that he sort of programmed his audience, by teaching them how to do rain and thunder and wind.
Yes.
He figured out a way to just create a bond that, as near as I could tell, always worked.
Well, his persona was very strong. His capacity for channeling pure energy and shooting it right back at you was, I stole a lot from a lot of the people you're talking about.
Me too.
It was like I watched what some of them did. By the time Mark was really a professional storyteller, he didn't do the fair anymore. But when he was at the fair, whatever he did, that guy could make you feel like you were really in another time and place. But that was what a lot of us could do. That was the point.
Right.
Suspend disbelief is what they call it, and make it so you feel. That's one of the things I loved about the fair, is it was completely safe. We even had our own security, some people of which were my dear friends, so that you could do whatever you needed to do to be what you would call free, and they would take care of you.
And this is getting back to another theme of these podcasts, is that the fair invited you into a place. They came to the fair knowing that they were going to be part of the show.
The wonderful thing was, of course, I don't know how much of the 50s you grew up in, but they were and early 60s, actually, before everything caught on. It was a horribly uptight, generic time. And the fair was a celebration, an actual renaissance. And the Pattersons got there first. So everything was new and interesting and innovative. And one thing I really loved being was I was a very big fish in an exceedingly small pond. So I could experience the kind of fame that I would not experience in a theatrical career, in my case.
Were you involved in the experimental theater scene in the 60s?
No, I had no interest. The 60s, mostly I was in junior high school. I was doing community theater. Very straight.
What were you
And
typically cast in?
big, loud characters, quaint old men, character parts. I had a beard when I was 15.
I had an interview with Pat Banyan,
Oh my God.
and he said you and he did a version of The Wizard of Oz
Oh, yes, we
at a.
did. It was the Sonoma State Hospital for the Retarded.
So tell me about your production with Pat of The Wizard of Oz.
Well, it was kind of like a city built for retarded people. And we were brought in What we did is we get them all dressed up and this and that, and we would tell them their lines and they'd repeat them. And it got to the point where it was kind of like Marat Sade, you'd find yourself sitting at the corner with your retarded friends having a normal conversation about what was going on. I learned a lot about taking chances.
Can you give me an example?
Just getting up on stage with retarded people. The guy that played the Tin Woodman had a gland problem. Every now and again, it would squirt something like LSD into his system, and he would have these gigantic hallucinations. So you'd be having a conversation with him, and he'd immediately see something, and then he'd drop back into reality. And that was interesting. The rest of it, the people were pretty wonderful, very simple, very loving. The guy that played the wizard was a guy who had been found walking around after the '06 earthquake as a child. And they just figured he was retarded, and he spent his entire life at that facility. They didn't even know if he was retarded or not. So that was interesting, but the rest of it was go with it. I think we were there for a week. It was like going into another dimension completely.
Getting back to my list of people who had the ability to sway an audience, how about Adam Long?
Oh my God. Adam Long was a genius. I am amazed he didn't end up being Johnny Depp. He was that amazing. The guy had a talent, fearless, naturally funny. So no matter what idiotic thing he did, it was truly funny. He knew what was funny and what wasn't, and he was very strong and fearless. I
And
had a
he
lot of respect for him.
and he could get a lot of people on his side in his insanity.
Oh, absolutely. He was always the main event. Everybody else in the show was a straight man and happy to be so. He was unparalleled.
This next name, he was in a way the opposite of Adam, but can you talk to me about Theo Katzoff?
Theo Katzoff was a consummate professional. He could do anything. We were like brothers, truly. I was so close to him. We could bounce off each other for hours. I did my best improv stuff going from place to place with him.
What made him
And
an improv comedy partner to Treasure?
I married his ex-wife, kind of. And then we found out we liked each other just fine. And that's where the Halberdiers came from. And it just stuck. When we used to get together years ago, we'd show up at the fair and bounce off each other for a while until we both got tired. And again, everyone you're speaking of in the context of the Renaissance Fair, they were all fearless, absolutely fearless. That's the most important thing, is you trusted the environment, you trusted your fellows until you found out a good reason not to, which was not often, actually. And the audience was there to play. They've become less so as the years have gone on, but then I haven't been on a stage in quite a while.
I always felt like, especially working with Mark, you could almost just throw anything out. It would come into your head, and then
Right.
somebody would pick it up.
I did a lot of research so I could talk kind of like a Shakespearean person. I used to take regular jokes and Shakespeareanize them. And that put me ahead of the group, and I would hang around with people that were clever in that manner. Like, for instance, you spoke of Greg Brown, who used to be Greg Probst. That man was amazing in his capacity to give and take. He was just one of the best.
And he also knew how to do nothing and attract attention.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No, it's all right. No, you're absolutely right. One cannot say enough. But whatever Greg did ended up being better than it was. He was incredibly supportive. He was the straight man, which is funny because he was funnier than most of us. But he was the most supportive person you'd ever hope to meet. And also, there was a ribbon running through the fair that a lot of us were absolutely bent on having a wonderful time. We worked real hard, not getting terribly serious. And I think that was reflected in our work. You know, it was light and airy, and we really didn't give much of a shit for the history. We just wanted people to laugh. The fair gave us parameters, we stayed in them and learned how to sneak in jokes that would make a conventional audience tickle their funny bone because it came out of nowhere.
I've been
Like at one
interviewing
point,
a lot of musicians, and one
uh,
thing they think a lot about is how to take something, make it sound period, but also be relatable to a modern audience. So,
yeah,
what
yeah.
is the line between, no, we really can't do that, but we can do this, which is close enough and entertaining?
Well, at one point they were obsessed with
Strictly,
historicalness,
yes, I was there for that era.
and unfortunately, the era we were trying to reproduce was pretty grim. So you're absolutely right about the whole, we want to give them the flavor of the time. One year, we had this guy, the obscene juggler, and almost 3/4 of the audience wanted to see this guy. He's absolute genius. And at one point, they sat me down and I had to BFA his act. And I apologized because I was fucking with his hat. Luckily, I didn't interfere with what he's doing. And I don't know if it improved. I know it didn't particularly improve things, but it did get the company off his back for a minute because they unfortunately had an absolute insane fear of professional performers. So the quality of the show went down, but it made an opening for people like us who work cheaper to shine. But the thing is, I do not choose to poke holes in it anymore.
No,
I have a lot of opinions about what would have made the fair better and the owners and all of that. And then it all comes down to I never put a fair together, and they gave me a home for a very long time.
I agree 110%. I went through my, well, if I was just in charge, this is what I would do phase. But then
Yeah.
I looked around and said, they've hired 200 people to park cars. They've got a park together. They've assembled 1,000 people. And if they want to tell me there's going to be a lot of parades, and I was just, I got, like you said, I never put on a fair. And the times I've tried to produce things, it has been humbling at how hard it is.
And also, there is so many things vying for their entertainment. I remember at one point, Disney had like strolling characters that juggle that they swiped from us, and they started doing quirky street theater. And you can't really compete with that. And as things changed and things got more uptight, like I would never go on a stage. I could not deal with the whole PC thing. It's too many things to remember. So I was very happy to be in a booth for a long time.
One of the things I remember you telling us young halberdiers was to always be aware of your audience, and
Yeah,
that on the streets, somebody could be looking at you. And so if you're just going to stand there, just stand there in an interesting way.
yeah. Well,
But
I used to love it when we go picture and then pose stupidly. That was wonderful.
Why don't you explain to those listeners who might not remember the picture bit?
We'd be doing some period piece, and all of a sudden somebody'd show up with a camera, and someone would yell, "Picture!" And then we'd all get together in a clump and pose like idiots and keep posing till we were done, and then go back to whatever it was we were doing.
And what I remember specifically liking about that bit was that we all respected each other in a way. So it didn't become a joke where everybody was trying to get in front of the other person. The
Nope.
joke was that we were each trying to find an individual funny, stupid pose to be in the picture. And it wasn't a competitive.
Oh, not at all. I agree.
And when I started sort of directing shows at fair, that turned into be a valuable note in that
Mm-hmm.
you should always stage something that somebody 200 feet away should be able to look at the stage and come to some theory about why they are there and what they are doing.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the place to be subtle on stage. And
No. Well, that's the secret. Larger than life, because we didn't have the media to enlarge our performances. My throat has never gotten over it. The wonderful thing is that I learned at one point is if I'm not happy being there, I need to be somewhere else. And I did that periodically. And I would always come back under various circumstances. And the present show that I do in Irwindale is very nice as long as I am in my booth and I have complete control of the environment. So it doesn't really matter what happens at the rest of the fair. And so I don't have to go out and find fault, which makes me very happy.
what were your favorite stages at Northern and Southern Fair?
Caravansary stage at Black Point. And what was the name of it?
Drury Geek?
Drury Creek, yes, best stage at Southern Fair. But they never thought their theatrical environments for putting on plays were never well thought out. But after a while, it didn't matter. We were having so much fun.
Can
Who
I throw a
cares?
few improv bits at you and see what happens?
I guess.
Okay, for the first one, it's like 10:30, 11. So it's the fair's just opened. You're in the back. It's quiet. You see a family walking in your direction. Mom is wearing a garland and dad is wearing a Robin Hood hat. The girl is like 10 or so, and she's wearing a garland, which has obviously been recently purchased.
Uh,
She and her mom are wearing this granny dress, and they've attached some lace to it. Her brother is about 18 months younger, is also wearing a recently purchased Robin Hood hat, and he's carrying a small wooden sword. They see you and they sort of smile. And what do you do?
that time of day?
Yeah.
Uh, cousins, how do come to fare from your fair country abodes? You've even washed, begods, the children how they've grown.
The
Yes,
little
I'm
girl,
glad.
the little girl grabs her mom's leg and just looks up at you, and the little boy sort of waves his sword.
I am not in any wise fit to fight with you, great knight. And as for you, you small child are the most beautiful maiden as e'er I have seen in all of the days. And thank the gods you do not look like your father.
She giggles and looks up at you, and um, yeah, and it's clear that mom is pleased.
Farewell, cousins, I must be upon the stage at the hour of 11. You cannot bring the children, it is far too naughty. Away with you and farewell.
The dad asks if he can take your picture with him.
Oh, yea, well, at this hour of the day, I could use folk to help me stand up. I've been making merry all the night long.
Oh,
And Mary is an old friend of mine.
okay, we'll stop that there. And they take their picture and they walk away with a pleasant fair experience. Here's another one. It's Thanksgiving. You are you, and you're having the family's extended meal. Let's say you have a niece. We'll call her Zoe. She's about 14 years old, and she puts down her fork of mashed potatoes and says, I'm going to do fair next spring. I want to be just like Uncle David and have the funny stories that he always tells us. Your sister puts down her fork of mashed potatoes and says, Yes, David, tell me why Zoe, light of my life and reason for my existence, should go and work out at the Renaissance Fair. And you say,
We must make sure that she's looked after by the proper people. I think she probably should start in the Cuthberts Guild. We have to make sure that someone is responsible for her. And by all means, she can't stay overnight. So someone would have to take her there and pick her up. And there's a real good chance it won't be me because I have to work a little too hard. I'd be honored to keep an eye on her when I can, but I'm very, very, very busy. Although she could make a base camp at my booth, and the family thereabout will help take care of her. Curtain.
and finally, in a world where fair did not exist, what would have been your dream of success at the age of 16?
When I was 16, all I wanted to be was the king of the Renaissance Fair. And that's the truth of that. And anything I am, if I am successful theatrically, was because I spent the years I did working for the Pattersons. And that's about
Um,
as close as I can get because that was pretty out there. All I ever was or wanted to be was a member of the Fair family. It's funny, I had no interest in making it for one reason or another. I just wanted to keep doing fairs.
which is a very nice segue to my last bit, which is congratulations. This is another award ceremony. You
Mm.
have just been awarded the highly coveted Phyllis Patterson Award for Lifetime Achievement in Fair Skills. The band has been told to sit on its hands, and you have as much time as you like. Give me your acceptance speech.
I am delighted. I cannot think of another award I would like to get. The Phyllis and I fought for years for one thing or another, and probably would have done well to listen to each other a lot more than we did. But we still turned out some pretty good products. I want to thank Kevin Patterson for putting up with me because without him, I would not have stuck around at all. Say what you will about the Renaissance Fair, it shaped my entire life. I was very happy to be a part of the family because the family is the most important part of it, really, when you come right down to it. And I hate to say it, but I'm sorry that it turned out the way that it did, but that's life. But thank you for the life you gave me. And whatever fair you're ruling over, I can't wait to become part of it. Up there in Sky Fair, that's what they're calling it these days. And that is that.
I'm kind of running out of words.
It's okay. I'm kind of done too. My voice is going. Is that enough?
Well, this is going to be edited down, but I think it's perfect. But I always give the interviewee I say, when you were kind enough to say, let's do this, did you say to yourself, I have to remember to talk about who or such and such or this type of thing? Is there something that's tugging at your brain that the second we stop talking, you'll say, oh, I didn't mention blah, blah, blah?
I would like at this point to celebrate Joyce Nunemaker McCall, who gave me my home at the Ort Ferry and allowed me to find out how to be there and what to make to please the audience. And also to Fred McCall, because his music was the reason why the place was incredibly magical. But I got to thank Ron Patterson, and he never gets thanked enough for showing me basically how to handle an audience and to work with panache. And I want to thank the Halberdiers. Each and every generation, each and every one of them, they're a bunch of my favorite people, and they infected the fair so beautifully. You know, they went out and took over, which is part of my little plan. And I guess that's it, really. Thank you
Okay.
very much. Thank you very much for asking me to do it.
It's been a pleasure on my end as well. So let me stop recording. I think I go here. Stop recording. That was my February 2024 interview with David Springhorn. If you have questions or comments about this podcast or interview, you may contact me at djng@earthlink.net. If you or someone you know would like to be a guest on Fair Folk at Work, you may contact me at djng@earthlink.net. But that's it for this time. Thanks for listening. Bye bye.